do I look
I get
forward?
they're getting ready to start. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and I'm so happy to have you with me here for another conversation. I'm also excited to have my guest introduce herself, but I will do that. Usually I like to take a break to let everybody know that Pleasure Pulse is live. So we will take a short break and come right back and get into tonight's discussion. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Pleasure Pulse. I'm so happy that you are joining me for another conversation, and I'm also excited to be sitting down with my guest. This conversation has been a while in the works, so I'm happy that you came all the way here not so that we could have this conversation, but I'm happy that we are able to have this conversation while you're here. So please introduce yourself, let everybody know whatever you want them to know about you.
Hi everybody. My name is Nadia Mills. I'm a physical therapist. I'm originally from St. Kitts, but I work in the US right now. And the reason Roma wanted to talk to me is because my specialty is in pelvic floor health. And so, yes, it's been over a year, I think. Over a year. So yeah, I'm glad that we got a chance to do this.
I'm so grateful. I'm so happy that we're able to talk about this because I think people have a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions too. And I think part of it is sometimes, you might feel something in your body, but you're not able to name it. And I think the pelvic floor, like when I think about the pelvic floor, I think about something that feels kind of invisible, even though it's a big space. So I'm so happy that we are able to, shine some light, give some credit to the pelvic floor. So we could just jump into our discussion. So what is the pelvic floor actually, and why is it important, especially for sexual activity?
Okay. So the first thing I like to say is you're sitting on it. So the pelvic floor is basically all of the muscles that sit on the bottom of your pelvis. So can I use the model to show?
Of course.
All right. So you're literally sitting on, if you can see, which way should I put this? Okay. So these are the pelvic floor muscles. So this is your pelvis. This is what you're sitting on. And at the bottom of it are all these muscles that fill up the gap. Okay. Usually if you look at a skeleton, there's a huge hole at the bottom of the pelvis. And so the pelvic floor muscles are the muscles that attach from your sitting bones. So when you're sitting, you feel those two kind of hard points. Those are your sitting bones from side to side. So it stretches from side to side, and then it stretches from your pubic bone, which is the bone in the front. So if you go down past your navel and you keep going, you hit your pubic bone. And then what we call the tailbone. Right, so that's the back part of it. And they literally, I tell everybody, they hold everything in. So everything that's up here are your sexual organs, your bladder, and your rectum. And so their role in sex is, those pretty much are the muscles. Like for females, the vagina itself is a muscular tube, and that's part of the pelvic floor. So pelvic floor is pretty much what happens, or the muscles you use when you're having sex.
Okay. And what do you do as a pelvic floor therapist? Because yesterday was the physical therapy symposium that I hope lots of people were able to attend, but if not, can watch.
Right, it's still available.
It's still available on YouTube. I thought it was really interesting, and I think lots of people know about physical therapy in general, but maybe not about pelvic floor physical therapy. So what do you do as a physical therapist who focuses on the pelvic floor?
Well, it is definitely very different because I was at the symposium yesterday and I had my little tools and weights and stuff, and one lady asked me, she's like, where do you put this? And she's like, do you put it between your legs? I said, no, you put it in your vagina. And so like I was just saying, the vagina is a muscular tube. And as a pelvic floor therapist, I work with the vagina and all those other muscles that I just showed at the bottom of the pelvis. These muscles are voluntary muscles. I say they're just like, I give the demonstration. It's just like your arm muscle. It contracts, it relaxes, and you have control over it, or you're supposed to. Right? And so they have sort of the same problems. They can get weak, they can get tight, they can get damaged. So from trauma or from birthing, they can become damaged. So let's say, for example, you have a hamstring pull, right? That's a muscle. You can have something similar that happens in the pelvic floor muscles as well. The main problem I think that we have as humans and why we have issues with our pelvic floor is we've developed a lifestyle that doesn't allow them to be optimal. And what I mean by that is from about the time we go to kindergarten all the way through adulthood, we sit at this level. And so we never really go into deep squatting, which squatting kind of helps to open up this area and helps to stretch it. We don't walk as much as we used to. We don't climb as much as we used to. And so those muscles become weaker and tighter. In my profession, I also work a lot with pregnant women, which pregnancy changes your body significantly. And giving birth causes a lot of trauma sometimes to the pelvic floor muscles. So women can become incontinent, that's where they leak urine, or even during birth they have lacerations where they get tears, and so the muscles truly become damaged. And unfortunately, because like you said, it's sort of an invisible thing, or it's something that people don't talk about much, it never gets rehabbed. And so let's say you get a hamstring pull, you get a hamstring tear, and you continue through life with this without ever rehabbing it, you're not going to walk very well. Right? And so in the same way, if there's damage done to the pelvic floor muscles and they're not rehabilitated, they're not going to function very well.
So what are some of the signs or the symptoms that maybe there has been some damage done to those muscles?
Okay.
What should people look out for? What should they feel for?
So apart from trauma, even just daily life, on the symposium yesterday, I spent a significant amount of time talking about constipation. And so constipation, like they say there's a gateway drug, constipation is my gateway diagnosis into pelvic floor dysfunction. And so something as common as constipation is a sign that your muscles are not working well. So we're not only talking about these muscles, also you have your colon, your rectum. Those muscles you cannot control. But when you're defecating, you do have control of that. You don't just use your pelvic floor muscles, you also use your core muscles. And it's a whole, we can talk about it. I gave all the instructions of how to have a bowel movement yesterday. We can go through that today if you'd like to. But if you're constantly constipated, there's one issue that it could be your diet, but it could also be that there's tightness in your pelvic floor. Your anal muscles might be tight, and you may not have the right pressure in your core. And when I say that, when you're having a bowel movement, you're actually not supposed to be pushing and straining, right? Because when you're having a bowel movement, these muscles should be relaxing, and then the pressure should be coming through your core to evacuate. And so constipation, that's my gateway diagnosis. Painful sex, that's one of the things. Incontinence is one of like the biggest issues that people are most familiar with. And so incontinence meaning you leak urine. And the classic thing I say, oh, you ever hear people say, oh, don't make me laugh because if I laugh, I'm going to
pee.
Right,
Yeah.
I'm going to pee. So that is a sign that the muscles are not holding against the pressure that you're developing.
And I thought it was just a line that the joke was really funny.
Right. Well, I will be honest to say that sometimes you laugh so much that you lose control, but it shouldn't be something that you have to think about
all
every
the time. Okay.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I mean, just as you're talking, you know, it is, I think, evidence to the invisibility of the issue, right? Because you're talking about it as a gateway, which is definitely making me think like sometimes we have other issues that we're not necessarily taking that far. Because when I think about something like constipation, I'm not thinking perhaps it's an issue with my pelvic floor and I should take a step behind beyond, you know, just going to a general practitioner for that kind of help. And I can imagine how also, you know, that is affecting your sex life, that tension, you know, that lack of flexibility or ease of movement.
Well, let's even build on that. So let's say, for example, you're constipated, and I love it because people come up to me and they say, oh, does this have anything to do with it? I'm like, yes. So there was a there was a conversation around constipation, and someone shared with me, they're like, yeah, when you're constipated, you don't have as strong an erection because it's a small area. You know, like you said, there's a lot going on down there, and if there is, I had another model that have nerves. There are nerves all the way in this area. If your colon is backed up, to have stimulation to your penis, it comes through neural sensation. And so if you have pressure on the nerve, sometimes the nerves can misfire or not fire at all. And so sometimes you can prevent an erection. Also, there's a lot of blood vessels in here. So to get an erection, there has to be blood flow to the penis. So if there's a constriction or restriction, sometimes that doesn't happen. So that's why I say constipation, we need to deal with that because it messes up everything else. And even further, with the habit of straining, we push down. So all the pressure that we're putting on these organs or on the pelvic floor stretches it out and weakens it. So it's like it just perpetuates the problem. It makes everything weaker.
Okay. So, I mean, we're kind of talking about constipation and so on. Are there other pelvic floor issues that
Tons
exist?
of them.
And how common are they? Yeah.
So like I said, the most common well-known one is the incontinence, meaning the leakage. For sex, because we're talking about pleasure pulse, there is painful intercourse. A lot of females have painful intercourse and they think that's normal.
Right.
For men also, I like to tell people it's not just about women. There are also men who have painful intercourse. Or sometimes men will avoid intercourse because they have pain and they don't want to admit it. And so there's a lot of times that tension develops in a relationship where the female or the male will cause some sort of contention because they don't want to engage physically because it's painful and uncomfortable, right? So there are also conditions where, let's go back to again. So what we have, so let's go through the organs that we have here.
Yeah.
We have our bladder, so that deals with urination. You have your vagina, or you have your penis and your testicles, which is sexual function. And then you have your rectum, which is defecation. Okay, so let's go to the bladder. So we talked about leakage. There's also a problem with frequency, where you tend to go to the bathroom like every 10 minutes, just an unusual amount of times. And then sometimes you feel like going and you go and then nothing happens. And a lot of times that gets misdiagnosed as like a UTI because there's irritation. And so people get treated for, the obvious, a UTI, or they get tested, and even though they're negative, they still get treated for UTI because they don't look beyond that. Okay, so like I say, sexually, there could be the problem with pain, whether in males or females. There's a thing called vaginismus, where the muscles of the vagina become spastic, and so it actually like closes the vagina, and so it can make penetration impossible or very painful. So that can impede sex, or that could even impede having a gynecological exam. And there are a lot of people who report, I don't want to go to the doctor because it hurts. And so it increases your risk of having cervical cancer. Well, it doesn't increase your risk, but having limited mist, right? Because you can't have access to see what the tissue looks like, right? So so there's a whole list, but there's that. And then, like I say, constipation in the rectum. So all three systems tend to have problems. Beyond the organs now, the muscles themselves have problems. A lot of people that I treat with pelvic floor dysfunction come in because they have back pain. So there's back pain, there's hip pain, there's tailbone pain. So there's pain pretty much in that whole general area. And I tell people, I have treated people with elbow pain, and once we started getting into it, traced it all the way back down to their pelvis.
Wow.
Yeah.
How? Like, I'm curious. I'm curious.
How? Okay. And so, where I work now, whenever there's a patient that comes in with neck, shoulder, whatever pain, and traditional methods don't fix them, they say, go see Nadia. Okay. So the other thing the pelvis is, so not even just the muscles, the bones, this is what we call the foundation of your body. So if you had a house, this would be the foundation. If your foundation is cracked, if it's out of alignment, it messes up the rest of the house, right? If you have a shifted foundation, you might find the door doesn't close well, the window doesn't close well, the house moves. So if your pelvis is misaligned, and it can be very easily misaligned, it can travel all the way up your spine. It can travel, so I've treated headaches because of pelvic floor dysfunction, neck pain. I've treated shoulder pain, so we're spreading out from the base, so we're going up the spine to the head, out to the shoulders. And so the longer the problem stays in your body, the further out it can go. And so the furthest that I've found it so far has been in tennis elbow.
Wow, okay. That's, all very interesting, because, I mean, at least, in my hosting of the show, I try to show how everything is connected, right? Like, we're not just talking about, our experience with this part of our body that's like separated from or disconnected from other parts of our body, or even things happening, socially, psychologically, mentally, and so on. So like you're talking about an elbow, as a manifestation of pelvic floor dysfunction is actually extremely interesting and maybe a little worrying, right? Because then
not
it could
worrying. What the whole point of me trying to educate people of this, like I said, we run around or we go around with problems for a long time, and we've tried traditional approaches and it doesn't work. And so having this knowledge, go like, oh, okay, maybe it's that. So I wanted also to add into you again. So we're talking about, and I want to talk about sex. So we're talking about functions here, but I honestly start here because I've had cases where, like I was talking about frequency, where you feel like you have to go to the bathroom all the time. I ask people, like, when you have a presentation to do, how do you feel? Like, you feel nervous, right? And what does your body feel like it wants to do?
Poop.
Okay, it wants to poop, right? It wants to poop or it wants to pee.
Yeah.
So it's like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm like, no, it makes perfect sense because your brain and your pelvis are very much connected. And in your brain, there's a part of your brain, that's the primitive part of your brain. That's the part that you don't really control, because if you did, you'd kind of mess the system up. So that runs on automatic. So you're nervous because you're going to give a presentation. Your body feels fear. It registers that as a threat. Right? It registers that as danger. And so when you're in danger, your body eliminates functions that will impede it from being able to escape from a dangerous situation. And so that feeling of your butterflies in your stomach, or feeling like you need to poop or you need to pee, that's your body trying to prepare itself to defend itself, the fight or flight, either defend itself or run away. During COVID, there was a huge increase of people having what we call frequency, meaning they feel like they have to pee all the time because life was so uncertain. And it's not that anything physically changed, but because of where our mindset was, that affected our physical function. So they are all related.
All related. Okay. Let's take a short break here and then come back and get more into pelvic health and sex, but also some other things, of course. So we'll take a short break and come right back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Pleasure Pulse. I'm your host, Roma Richardson, and I'm joined by my guest, Nadia Mills, a physical therapist specializing in pelvic floor therapy. And we have so far been talking about how the pelvic floor muscles, the pelvic floor area connects to the rest of our bodies, and how there are some interesting, sometimes, manifestations of pelvic floor dysfunction, like an elbow. And as you were talking, I was like, I roller skate. I've picked back up roller skating. And I remember a while ago seeing a video from somebody who was roller skating too, fell on their tailbone and was basically out of it, I think, for maybe weeks or months. So I'm also thinking about my pelvic, because I never really thought about how a fall like that could affect my function in general, and that area. So I'm also, side note, and I'm like, maybe be more careful, because I'm sure there are lots of other activities too. We talk about sitting and the like regular sitting that we do, the lack of movement. That was one of the things that was emphasized yesterday, movement and mobility for good pelvic floor health. So this conversation is just like opening my eyes to a lot of things. And before we get like specifically into, or more deeper into pelvic floor health and sex, what would you say are some myths about the pelvic floor region that you encounter in your practice, or just in general?
Myths. Before we say myths per se, I want to talk about like taboos.
Okay.
Like first of all, that you don't talk about that. You know, one of the things. My business is called DTPT Wellness, and it's called Down There Physical Therapy. And the reason I chose that is because every time someone would come to me, they would be like, the doctor said you could help me with down there. I'm like, down there, down there where? You know, he's like, we're so uncomfortable just talking about this very important part of our body because there's this huge stigma or taboo around it. Some of the myths that, like for some of the conditions, like for example, we talked about the leaking. Everybody's like, oh, that's normal. You know, there are a lot of things that are common, but they're not normal, meaning that it is a sign that there's some kind of dysfunction happening. So incontinence, that's an issue. The thing about constipation is like, oh, that's normal, but it's not.
Yeah.
Painful sex, that's just the way it is. You know, it's my body. You know, that's just me. Because of the silence about this, there's a lot of people going around with a lot of discomfort, and they think it's just them because they don't hear anybody else talk about it. Yeah. So that's kind of in general. It's more just we don't talk about it, and you know, that's not something you share with even your healthcare providers.
Yeah. I think, well, one of the things that I try to emphasize too, which is why, you know, a show like Pleasure Pulse exists these things existed in my head before they existed in real life. And shout out to ZIZ for you know, taking this step to make it a reality. But I think a lot about how our silence has like real life impacts.
It does.
On our bodies, on our relationships, but especially on our bodies, you know, on ourselves, like excluding other people from it, just from ourselves. And, you know, prevents us from achieving optimum health and well-being because, you know, we've been told not to talk about certain things, or we've been told not to pay too much attention to certain things, or we've been told that certain things are normal, like painful sex, you know. People come to expect sex to hurt. And of course, there is some, you know, degree, depending on what kind of sex you're having, of pain that might be pleasurable to you. We're talking about pain that's not pleasurable, that is simply hurtful, you know, and that affects you in that way. So I think it's also, you know, important in this conversation to definitely emphasize how key and critical it is to put all of these things in the open, so that we could just talk, and so that we could, you know, actually get some support and some help for the issues that we're experiencing. I mean, you don't live in St. Kitts, so I can imagine.
But I'm accessible.
No, I mean, I can imagine that. Actually, I don't even know, because we're open in some ways here. But I'm curious, you know, because you interacted with a lot of people yesterday. I'm curious about the openness or the level of reception to what you were talking about here versus, you know, other spaces where you.
Well, I think openness, we can openly joke about things. You know, but if it comes to just asking a serious question, so we always come in, that's what I say, everybody comes through in a whisper. But you know, we could be like, out in public, and you know, but we're joking, so we're not taking it seriously, and again, we're just like, oh, well, that's normal. But like I said, there's so many people, they're like, oh, I want to talk to you. Because there's so many people dealing with things, and they don't know who to talk to, or they're like, well, maybe it's just me, and maybe it's just my body is weird or something. And so we're not truly open, because I have people that come to me and they've been dealing with problems for years, and they've been going to multiple doctors for years, and they get to me 7, 10, 20 years later, and they say, you're the first person I've ever said this to. Right? And sometimes it is hard, because, you know, sometimes you go to a provider like, oh, I don't think they'll be receptive to that. Or again, it's like, oh, maybe it's just me. But we really need to be more open, especially if like we're seeking support or medical assistance. We just say it. You know, that's like I was telling your cameraman, just say it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that sense, being open in that way, you really can get the answer that you need. Because if you keep it in, nobody can really help you.
Yeah, like closed mouths don't get fed.
Right.
So similarly, like silent, I don't know. Forget it. Just leave it
Yeah.
at closed mouths don't get. Just leave it there. Okay, so pelvic health. I imagine it changes over the course of time, or the course of life, rather. So during puberty, or when you're a child, pregnancy, menopause, aging, all of those things. Can you tell us about how pelvic floor health or pelvic health changes
over
during
the course of
those
time.
times, and maybe the impact that it might have on your sexual life?
Okay.
Yeah.
So I am an adult pelvic floor therapist, but there's actually like children. There's a child pediatric pelvic floor therapy. So again, over the lifetime, these are functions that all of us have. We all have defecation, urination. Sexual function happens at puberty. And so as children, they may have issues with their bladder or bowels. And so there are pediatric specialists that deal with that. And again, constipation, number one issue, always. And then sometimes like persistent bedwetting. So like after the age, let's say after 5, there's still like bedwetting and stuff like that. So those are challenges for pediatric therapists. So in puberty, when hormones start filling our body and start changing our body completely, like I said, there's a normal process that we go through, right? So we develop our secondary sexual characteristics. Everything's going well. In terms of, like I said, there's just normal development. Where the problem comes in general, like I said, it's lifestyle. So sedentary lifestyle. We get to kindergarten and this is the level our hips stay at. Like I look at my daughter and she sits on the floor in a squat and she's drawing and she's doing all that. From the time we go to a school, traditionally, we no longer go past that level. And so, like I said, everything in that area becomes tight because it doesn't go through its full range anymore. And even someone asked me the other day, when do we start developing back pain? And I said, when you're about 5 years old, because of that lack of motion in that area. So, and that's the other thing. These are not things that just happen instantly. It really is over a course of time. And then when we address it is at the point where functionally we just can't deal anymore, right? So the mobility aspect of it, that kind of contributes to it. For women, a lot of it happens with pregnancy because again, the baby literally has to come out of the pelvic floor muscles. And even in carrying the baby, it changes your body dynamics so much, the weight distribution, stretching of the muscles and all that. The baby's sitting on your pelvic floor basically, and messing with your hips because it needs to come out of that. So a lot of what I do is related to what has happened in pregnancy. And I've treated people 50 years after pregnancy, and what they came in for happened because of pregnancy. And then with menopause, so changes again, hormonal changes. And men have issues, but women, because our bodies change so much because of hormonal influence. During menopause, you have issues with vaginal dryness or vaginal atrophy, where the vagina actually starts shrinking, right? And some of my favorite patients are my older patients who are sexually active. Because they're just a hoot. But yeah, so as you get older, you do have, again, problems with pain or discomfort. And back to the general issue of back pain, again, it's the mechanics of it. And if we're not exercising, if we're not active, our whole body is over time just becoming more and more limited. And so, in a sense, the pelvic floor is related to everything that you do throughout your whole entire lifetime.
So I'm hearing from what you're saying that there are probably going to be, different impacts sexually, or different manifestations sexually, depending on where you are in that stage with your pelvic health. Because, you mentioned older patients. I imagine that they might be dealing with different issues or different symptoms than younger, maybe pre-pregnancy patients might be dealing with. So I'm also curious about like what are some of your treatment plans for your older patients, maybe versus your younger patients? What does that look like?
Okay.
Assuming they're coming with like different
Okay,
issues.
so actually, I'm glad you kind of brought it up that way. So, what do we tend to see in different populations based on age? So, younger patients before pregnancy, I mentioned vaginismus, where there's that problem with the muscles spasming. That is very common. And pelvic floor tightness. So again, because of, like I say, our lifestyles where our bodies don't really move, you can have a lot of tightness. And one of the things that I like to clarify is like, oh, good, it's tight. Oh, for example.
I was just going to say, like, you know, because that's a whole conversation in itself.
Let's go
right?
into that. Because, like, whenever I do an exam and I'm like, oh my goodness, these are tight. And everybody's like, oh, yeah.
Yes,
I'm
yes,
like, no.
Yeah, no. Mm-hmm.
So this is what I have to explain. So, and I use this as an example. If your neck is tight, does that feel good?
Yeah.
No, right? So a tight muscle is a dysfunctional muscle.
Yeah.
If your neck is nice and loose and your head is supported, you feel good because the muscle is strong. There's no tension in it. You know, it can carry the weight of your head and everything else without causing pain. So it's the same thing with the pelvic floor muscles. If the muscle is tight, it means it's holding on for dear life. You know, and then if you try to have penetration with tightness, and so the muscle's already contracted or shortened, it's going to be painful because there's no mobility, there's nowhere for it to move. And so you do find, like, pre-pregnancy, you find a lot of that, like tight pelvic floor, and then like the vaginismus. And then there are other conditions like vulvodynia, where there's pain or irritation on the outside of the vagina. So you find that a lot in younger populations. Then with pregnancy or postpartum, you have, oh, and hold on, wait a minute. The leaking, young athletes, like female athletes, they also have issues with leaking. Because again, as their body is going through all this strain and pressure, training and so forth, the pelvic floor is part of the core. And so if they're working on their abs and their back and everything else, and they're not working on
I was just going to say,
pelvis,
you don't really think about,
So gymnasts have a lot of issues with that. Track and field stars have a lot of issues with that, and weightlifting. Okay, so that's pre-pregnancy.
Yeah, because you also see it, and this is just, you know, so we'll get back to the point that we're on. Because like when I watch like weightlifting videos, especially those doing like really heavy squats and so on, like peeing during the exercise is very, I don't want to say common, but no one reacts to it. So it's like, that happens, you know? So yeah, I was just,
And that's a bad sign. One of the things I shared yesterday, I said in the CrossFit culture, and I hope they don't come after me because I say this, but it's very common that like, oh, you work so hard that you peed on yourself. You know, no. It means you've overworked your system so hard, and that your whole core isn't in control. You know, so it's not a good sign. And so therefore, if you're in a weight intensive type of activity and you're leaking, that part of your training is missing. You need to work on that core, because it's like okay, so one of the things that we use in learning about pressure management, because that's what the issue is, not being able to manage pressure in your core. We use the example of a Coke can. So when the Coke can is full and it's closed, you can't smash it. The minute you open it, you can smash it, because the forces are different. And so if you are lifting a lot of weight and you're generating a lot of force up here and you're leaking at the bottom, you're not managing the forces in your body correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let you continue now with all the stuff. And then I don't even think we're
But that's the thing, though, because as I'm talking, you'll see these examples in life, and you're like, oh, okay, and you start making the connections. So we talked about pre-pregnancy. So like I said, during pregnancy, your body is changing. A lot of somebody asked me about diastasis recti yesterday. So that's where, as your abdomen is growing, your muscles start separating. Right? That happens. It can happen outside of pregnancy too, but again, we'll try to stay on track. So as that's happening, it is again your body not being able to maintain the forces that are being placed on it. So that is, and so again, it's not just the muscles on the bottom. So as a pelvic floor therapist, I deal with everything core. Okay, so diastasis recti, so that's where your abdominal muscles separate. And a lot of people after pregnancy, they're like, oh, I have this little pooch that doesn't go away. Or like when I come up, I see this little point, right? And so that's where the muscles have been deformed and they're not connecting and supporting your core the way they used to. Sometimes that part doesn't bother you, but you end up with the back pain, you know, the shoulder pain, because if you're not getting the support from the front, the rest of your body's going to try to do it. Okay, the incontinence, constipation, and then prolapse. That's where the organs start descending, where they start to the point where it feels like something is coming out of either your vagina or your rectum, right? So that's where the organs are literally losing their suspension and starting to fall down or out. That can happen with pregnancy and also later in life. And then the trauma also of delivery. So you can have tears during pregnancy. Also the positioning that they put you in pregnancy.
It's
not ideal.
Unnatural.
Right, it's not ideal. And so you can have shifts where the pelvis actually becomes out of alignment and you can end up with hip pain and back pain, knee pain, all of that stuff. So those are the things that kind of surround pregnancy. And then like I say, in their older age, let's say, okay, you've had a baby. Let's say you didn't have a baby.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go through. We didn't have that trauma of birth and so forth. With the drop in estrogen during menopause, you have increased chances of osteoporosis. Also, you have the vaginal atrophy, meaning estrogen helps to keep things nice and plump and juicy. Right? So when you start losing estrogen, then you start having the vaginal dryness. You might start having some tearing during intercourse because there's not enough moisture or lubrication to keep the tissues comfortable.
Yeah.
Right. So that's mainly the issue for older adults.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what you see them for and treat them.
Sometimes, but it could be my back hurts. You know, this is uncomfortable. It could be a combination of a lot of things. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I mean, we've kind of been talking about how sexual pleasure and function are related to pelvic floor health, but I don't know if you want to say anything more specifically about that or get into pelvic floor issues about that, or you could just show us some of some of the
my
things.
tools?
I mean, I have a question next about advice to help people achieve pelvic floor health, and I'm sure some of these might be related, but you know, we could take some time to do some demonstrations so that people know.
Okay, we can come back to that.
Okay.
For sexual health, what I want people to start with, and like I said, a lot of times we think physical, but a lot of our sexual health is mental. And so part of my job is first kind of seeing where you are in terms of your mental state. And so for good sexual health, we need to have good personal mental health and also be comfortable with ourselves. And so, for example, again, someone just came up to me and said, well, sometimes women say this or they say that, but they say it after intercourse. I say we need to be at the point where we can have discussions before intercourse. Because like I said, a lot of people, they have sex, but they just doing it for not necessarily their pleasure, but because of the relationship or what they think the expectation is. And so it's important that they have their own confidence in themselves and also why they're engaging in sex, right? And be comfortable in your own body, no matter what it looks like, or no matter what you think of it. Or the other thing, like, so for example, if someone has an issue with like the leaking, they'd be like, oh, well, I don't want to have sex because I'm afraid I'm gonna pee while we're having sex. And so a lot of times pelvic floor dysfunction can hinder your relaxation or your enjoyment of intercourse. Or they won't orgasm because they don't want to get so relaxed that they don't have control over their body. And so like I said, the mental state is really important. Also, just regular like checkups, trying to make sure that your gynecological tests are done. Sexual diseases, you want to make sure that you're addressing that both medically and with your partner. Don't just hope, you know. So it's like you want to create an environment where pleasure truly is your focus rather than having a million other things that you're concerned about. So that's the first thing that I talk about for health. Yeah.
Okay. I'm also like curious about, I mean, maybe come up, you know, as we wrap up too, but I'm just like, how does your treatment, but I mean, you would want, everybody is different, right? Everybody is different, and everybody, you know, every person is different, and their physical, you know, physiology is different too. So I can't necessarily give you a hypothetical case, but maybe you can give me an example of somebody that you have treated who presented with some sexual pleasure or well-being concerns that was related to pelvic floor down there. Dysfunction.
All right, so we'll start off with, like I say, the painful intercourse, penetration. Sometimes, like I said, we talked about the tissue being tight, right? So sometimes penetration can be uncomfortable because there is not the flexibility to adjust to this new object that's being entered into the body. And like I said, that's very common in younger people. The way that we treat that is, so let's look at my little implements here. So one of the things, so stretching, so we're talking about a tight muscle. Like I say, I use the neck as an example a lot. We have our head, we have our shoulders, so we can stretch our muscle by doing this. We can move our neck, not so in the pelvic floor. So I didn't mention this yesterday. I have a friend who keeps messing with me. He's like, did you tell them about the finger? I'm like, no, I didn't tell them about the finger.
Tell us about the finger.
So how do I, as a physical therapist, treat the pelvic floor? I actually do like digital work. And so the pelvic floor is not just one layer of muscles, it's 3 layers of muscles. So the ones that we're familiar with are the sphincters, the openings, so the vagina, the urethra where the pee comes out, and the anus. And so those are visible. The other 2 layers are invisible, and the only way to access them is through the vagina or through the anus. And so a lot of times I use my finger. So I do a digital insertion. That's also how I examine the muscles to see what state they're in, whether they're tight and so forth. So I use my finger, insert it into the vagina, and test the 3 different layers to see what's happening in those layers. So for self-treatment, and I don't want anybody to just go and buy one of these and just to start doing this. If you think you might need this work, contact a pelvic floor therapist first. So for home treatment, we have a pelvic floor wand. Okay, so this end is like the size of a digital finger, of a, what do you call that, index finger, and this end is about the size of a thumb. Okay, and so this can be a tool that people can use to do the same thing, to enter through the vagina or the anus and stretch the muscles. So how do we stretch the muscles? So it's a circular, so you would enter in, you'd stretch that way, that way. We don't stretch the upper part because that's where the urethra is and the bladder, so you don't want to risk injuring the bladder. So we call this a clock face. So 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 9 o'clock. You work between 9 and 3 down to 6, and so you stretch that part of the vagina. So that's one way of dealing with vaginal tightness. I want to go back to the myth thing that you asked me.
Sure.
So everyone thinks, do Kegels.
Okay.
Right.
Everybody's
like, oh yeah, I know what to do. I know what to do. Just do some Kegels. No.
Okay. Let me stop.
So if you already have, so this is what I say, is like, if you have a tight muscle and you put weight in it, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to do some more. You're not benefiting in any way. So what we need to do is lengthen. You need to be able to make sure you have the full range. So that's what we do with the stretching. Once you have full range where the muscle can move through its full range, then you strengthen. So a lot of times when people come, it's like, I've been doing 100 Kegels a day. I'm like, you have not been doing 100 Kegels a day. So even that, they're like, oh yeah, I've been doing 100 Kegels. And then I test their muscles, and there's a scale from 0 to 5. 5 is like strong, healthy. And they're like a 1 or 2, barely contracting. And like, you've been doing 100 Kegels a day? Yeah, do one for me. And they're squeezing their butt, they're squeezing their stomach, they're squeezing their thighs, they're squeezing everything else around their pelvic floor muscles, but there's no activity in their pelvic floor muscles. Okay. So to treat tightness, the first thing we want to work on is range. So we work on stretching the pelvic floor muscles. And again, I have this little magic trick that I do, as like I show them how flexible their hamstring is. I work on the pelvic floor, then we stretch the hamstring again. And the amount of range that they gain from that, they're amazed. Yeah. So again, everything's related. So we stretch first, then we work on strengthening, we work on posture, and then we work on overall exercises to maintain, like I say, the pelvic floor, hips, abdomen, back. All right, so that's tightness. With And a lot of times, like if you have like the leakage, there is weakness there. There's always some tightness there, because like I said, because of how we in general live our lives, there's always going to be some tightness there. For the leakage, we work on isolating which muscles, because sometimes certain muscles are working and others are not. And so it's also bringing an awareness to that area. So again, with my finger, I would say, do you feel my pressure here? Yes. Okay. Can you contract that? And it's amazing, like you know, like they're thinking, they're like, no, am I doing it? Am I doing it? Like, no. So it's like bringing that connection of your mind to that area of your body. Right, right. And so we're like, okay, this is the muscle. When you go home, this is the one that you want. And so just kind of building up the right muscles to engage and strengthen them.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about your other
My other tools?
tools?
Okay. All right,
Toys, tools.
So we talked about the one. So the one is trigger points. So are you familiar with the term trigger points?
You can explain for our audience.
Okay, so trigger points is, again, let's use the shoulder because that's a great comparison. You go across and you find a spot. You're like, oh, it hurts right there. Or you feel even a knot right there. So the pelvic floor muscles also get trigger points. And so we talked about using the one for stretching. You could also use it for trigger points. So you would go in and you kind of scan the area, and when you find the spot that hurts, you would apply pressure to it, and usually you can release a trigger point by applying gentle pressure, keeping it there for about 30 seconds, and then after it releases, you stretch it. So the one is good for those two type of exercises. You have the pelvic weights, and so again, we talked about prolapse where the muscles are descending or the organs are descending. This can help with, so it's pretty much where the muscles contract and lift. So this is one of the tools that you can use for contraction and lifting. Then we talked about vaginismus and other, so there's also things that can narrow the vaginal canal. So we use this dilator, which looks very similar to a dildo, right? It comes in different sizes, and so if you're having issues where you can't even insert a tampon, you can start with a dilator from that size, and if your goal is intercourse or a gynecological exam, you can start stretching till you get to the size that you need. This one, this is a little bit different. So this is for penetration. So we had a question about depth penetration, that some women say that you go too deep and it becomes painful. So this is a set of rings. You can use as many rings as you need, and it allows for limited vaginal penetration, but for the partner with the penis to still feel like they're enclosed by a vaginal canal.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So we are wrapping up. Quick advice for people to help them achieve pelvic floor health, and of course let people know where they can follow you or reach out to you to become clients. You're taking the clients to you.
I am, yes.
Okay, and virtual is fine.
Yes.
Too. Okay.
Yes.
So yeah, so quick advice on how people can help to improve their pelvic floor health.
Okay. Well, if any of this resonated, if this kind of started clicking and makes sense to you, start looking for information. And like I said, don't go and try to self-treat. At least start looking for information so that you can see if symptoms of certain things is what you're feeling or experiencing. Or yes, they can reach out to me. My email is info@dtptwellness.com. I also have a YouTube channel where I've been doing some videos trying to educate people about that, and it's at dtptwellness.com on YouTube. I don't have an Instagram follow or Instagram handle. And I think honestly the main thing is to just learn how your body works or how it's supposed to work. And if you are experiencing any of these issues, reach out to a professional. And unfortunately not all professionals know the information, but reach out to someone who's specifically pelvic health related and start educating themselves more.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining me. This was a really interesting
Thank you. My pleasure.
Conversation. I was going to say eye-opening, but then I was going to say pelvic floor opening. None of those works. But thank you so much for joining me. I think this conversation was really timely and really useful. Always useful, and always a good discussion to have to continue in the vein of Pleasure Pulse, which is shedding light on some of these invisible and lesser known, lesser talked about areas. So thank you all for joining us for another Tuesday conversation. As usual, I'll wish you all a pleasurable evening, and I will see you next time. Bye.